The steam from my coffee cup fogged the window, blurring the neat, identical houses of our suburban street in Charlotte, North Carolina. It was a peaceful scene. A life I had built meticulously, piece by piece, with my husband, David. To the outside world, we were the picture of domestic bliss. A loving couple, a beautiful home, 2 cars in the driveway. But inside these walls, a quiet war was being waged, and I was losing. My normal world was a fragile facade, maintained by my silence and my husband's willful ignorance. The architects of my misery were his parents, Eleanor and Richard Prescott. I remember the year before David and I got married. It was a sweltering July, and Eleanor had called me in a frantic state. Richard's seemingly successful consulting business was on the verge of collapse. An audit had revealed years of mismanagement, and they were facing foreclosure on their home, the very house David grew up in. They needed $75,000, and they needed it yesterday. David, ever the devoted son, was distraught. He didn't have that kind of money, but I did. It was my inheritance, a nest egg my grandmother had left me, intended for a down payment on my own future home. The memory is crystal clear. We were in my small apartment, the air thick with the smell of cheap takeout and David's desperation. "I can't ask you to do this, Chloe," he had said, his voice cracking. But his eyes pleaded. Eleanor had already called me twice that day, her voice a syrupy mix of panic and entitlement. "You're already family, dear," she'd cooed. "Family helps family." So I sat down at my small desk, my hands trembling as I logged into my online banking. I thought of my grandmother's stories, of her saving every spare dollar. I thought of the future she wanted for me. Then I looked at David's face, etched with worry, and I made the transfer. The sacrifice felt immense, a piece of my own security given away. They promised to pay it back within a year. That was 6 years ago. The check never came. Instead, the sacrifice became a weapon they used against me, a constant reminder that I had bought my way into their family, and therefore had no right to complain. The trigger, the moment the Cold War turned hot, happened on our 5th wedding anniversary. David had planned a surprise dinner party for me at our home. He'd invited all our closest friends. His parents, of course, were in attendance, holding court in my living room. I was circulating, laughing with a friend from college, when I overheard Eleanor's voice, sharp and carrying, from the kitchen. She was talking to David's aunt, a notorious gossip. "I just don't see it lasting," Eleanor declared, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "She's so ambitious. It's not what David needs. He needs a woman who will focus on him, on a family, not on a career." Richard's gruff voice joined in. "She's got him wrapped around her little finger. He paid for this whole party, you know, with his money. Meanwhile, she's probably salting away every penny she makes for herself." The lie was so audacious, so breathtakingly cruel, it knocked the air from my lungs. The $75,000 I had given them flashed in my mind. The late nights I worked to rebuild my savings, the vacations we'd postponed because our budget was tight. David's salary barely covered the mortgage and their constant loans for a new car or a lavish vacation. My income paid for everything else. This party, the food, the wine, it was all paid for by me. My ambition was what kept their son, and by extension them, afloat. I felt the blood drain from my face. The laughter in the room sounded distant, distorted. For years, I had endured the subtle digs, the backhanded compliments, the constant undermining. I had told myself I was being sensitive. I had made excuses for them to David, who always just sighed and said, "That's just how they are." But this was different. This was a calculated public assassination of my character in my own home. It was a declaration of war. I turned from my friend without a word, my smile frozen on my face. My heart was a block of ice in my chest. For years I had played defense. I had absorbed their toxicity, hoping that my love for David would be enough to shield me. I was wrong. Love wasn't a shield. It was a vulnerability they had exploited. And in that moment, I decided I was done playing defense. It was time to go on the offensive. I walked past the kitchen, not giving them the satisfaction of seeing my pain. I went straight to my home office. My hands were steady now, my mind clear and cold. The $75,000 transfer had been a foolish act of love. This next one would be an act of self-preservation. Richard Prescott had built his career on a reputation of financial acumen and trustworthiness. He consulted for small business owners, advising them on their finances. It was all a sham, propped up by my money and David's contributions. I opened my laptop and began to type. I created a new anonymous email address. I drafted a simple factual message detailing how Prescott Consulting had been on the brink of bankruptcy, bailed out by personal funds from a family member under a verbal promise of repayment that was never honored. I attached a single, redacted bank statement showing the $75,000 transfer from my account to theirs. I didn't send it to the authorities. That would come later. For now, I sent it to just one person, Richard's largest and most influential client, a man known for his ruthless business practices and his absolute intolerance for financial instability in his partners. I pressed send. The first move had been made. The game had changed. The fallout was immediate and beautiful in its simplicity. 2 days later, a Tuesday morning, my phone rang. It was David. His voice was tight, with a confusion that bordered on panic. "Chloe, something's happened," he said. The background noise of his office muted, as if he'd ducked into a closet. "Dad just called me, screaming. He lost the Henderson account. Mr. Henderson terminated their contract this morning. Said something about financial impropriety. Dad is blaming everyone, the market, his assistant." He sounded completely unhinged. "Do you know anything about this?" I let the silence hang for a beat too long, picturing Richard's florid, angry face. "Why would I know anything about your father's business, David?" I asked, my voice a carefully crafted blend of innocence and concern. "That's terrible news. Is he okay?" The lie was effortless. For years I had lied to myself, pretending their behavior was acceptable. Now, lying to them felt like breathing. Inside, a cold satisfaction bloomed. This was only the beginning. The Henderson account was more than just their biggest client. It was their seal of legitimacy in the local business community. Without it, the whispers would start. Eleanor was next. She didn't call. She showed up at my front door that afternoon, her face a mask of strained civility. She didn't wait for an invitation, pushing past me into the foyer. Her eyes, usually narrowed in judgment, were wide with a frantic energy. "Chloe, we need to talk," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Richard is beside himself. This is a disaster. It's completely unfair. We think someone is trying to sabotage us." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "That sounds awful, Eleanor. Who would do such a thing?" Her gaze sharpened. This was the real reason she was here. "That's what we were wondering. The information Mr. Henderson received, it was specific. It was about our personal finances, about a loan." I raised an eyebrow. "A loan? I don't recall you ever taking out a loan. I remember giving you $75,000 6 years ago, which you promised to pay back. A gift is not a loan, Eleanor." Her composure cracked. Color flooded her cheeks. "You are a vindictive, ungrateful little girl. After everything we've done for you, welcoming you into our family." "Welcoming me?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You mean tolerating me while you drained my bank account and slandered me to anyone who would listen? Let me be very clear. Your financial problems are a direct result of your own actions. Don't you dare come into my home and accuse me of anything." She recoiled as if struck, sputtering about loyalty and family, her usual weapons now useless. She tried a different tactic, emotional blackmail. Tears welled in her eyes. "You're tearing this family apart. David will be devastated. You're going to make him choose." "No, Eleanor, I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady calm. You did that. You and Richard started this war the moment you decided my kindness was a weakness. You just didn't realize I would eventually fight back. Now, I think it's time for you to leave. She left, slamming the door behind her. But her words echoed in the empty house. You're going to make him choose. That night, David came home, his face etched with a weary sadness. His parents had spent the afternoon poisoning his mind, painting me as a cold, vengeful monster. He listened to their version. Then he listened to mine. He saw the logic. He saw the years of quiet slights he'd chosen to ignore. But the weight of familial obligation was a powerful anchor. They're my parents, Chloe, he said, his voice pleading. They're old. They make mistakes. Can't we just find a way to move past this? They didn't make a mistake, David. They made a choice. They chose to lie, to steal, to try and destroy my reputation. There is no moving past that. There is only justice. He sighed, running his hands through his hair. I don't know what to do. I'm caught in the middle. And for a few days, I felt utterly alone. I was the villain in the story they were spinning for the entire family. David was distant, trapped in a prison of his own inaction. I sat in my office, the silence pressing in on me. Doubt began to creep in. Had I gone too far? Was I becoming as cruel as they were? I looked at the picture on my desk, the one of me and David on our wedding day, so full of hope. A profound sadness washed over me. This wasn't the life I had envisioned. I was at my lowest point, isolated in a battle I had started but wasn't sure I could win without losing my husband. Just when the silence became unbearable, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. This is Sarah, David's cousin. I overheard my mother talking to Eleanor. What they are saying about you is disgusting. If you need anything, I'm on your side. I know what they're like. Sarah. We had only met a handful of times at awkward family gatherings. She was quiet, always on the periphery. But her message was a lifeline. I called her immediately. Her voice was a balm of sanity and validation. They did the same thing to my ex-husband, Sarah explained, her tone laced with a weary resignation, subtle at first, then outright lies. They need to control everything and everyone, especially the women who marry into the family. They see us as threats, not additions. She then gave me the ammunition I didn't know I needed. My dad has been helping Richard with his taxes for years. He's always complaining about it. Says Richard is a creative accountant, always fudging the numbers on his business expenses, claiming personal luxuries as company costs. My dad is too scared of Richard to ever say anything, but he keeps meticulous records, just in case. A new plan began to form, sharper and more devastating than the first. Sarah's validation had extinguished my doubt. I wasn't a monster. I was a survivor. My fight wasn't just for me. It was for every woman they had ever tried to diminish. A week later, I received a call from a local pastor, a man I knew was a close friend of the Prescotts. He was the intermediary, sent to broker a peace treaty. Chloe, he said, his voice gentle and placating. I've spoken with Richard and Eleanor. They are deeply hurt. They are willing to forgive and forget. They want to sit down, all of you, and find a path to reconciliation. I listened patiently, the phone pressed to my ear. I swirled the wine in my glass, the evening light catching the deep red. I let him finish his pre-rehearsed speech about grace and family unity. Thank you for the offer, Pastor, I said, my voice clear and unwavering. But reconciliation requires repentance, and repentance requires an admission of wrongdoing. Tell me, did they admit to lying about me? Did they offer to repay the $75,000 they took from me 6 years ago? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Well, he stammered, they feel there are faults on both sides. Then there is nothing to discuss, I cut in, my voice as sharp as glass. I am not interested in forgiving people who are not sorry. I am interested in justice. They seem to have mistaken my past patience for permanent permission to disrespect me. That permission is now revoked. Permanently. The time for talking is over. The time for consequences has just begun. I hung up the phone, the pastor's sputtering protests cut short. I looked at the files Sarah had sent me, scanned copies of her father's private notes on Richard's creative accounting. The path forward was no longer shrouded in doubt. It was a brightly lit avenue leading directly to their ruin. David would have to choose. And if he chose them, he would be just another piece of collateral damage in a war his parents had declared. The climax was not a shouting match or a dramatic confrontation. It was a quiet, precise demolition, executed in the one place they felt most powerful, their own home. Richard and Eleanor were hosting their annual Christmas Eve party, a gaudy affair designed to showcase their supposed success and standing in the community. It was their stage, and they were the stars. This year, however, I had rewritten the script. David had, after weeks of agonizing indecision, finally chosen a side. He chose me. The evidence from his cousin Sarah was undeniable, and it finally shattered the illusion of his parents' infallibility. He walked beside me as we approached the Prescott's front door, his hand a warm, steady presence on my back. He was nervous, but resolute. We walked into a room buzzing with conversation and festive music. Richard was holding a glass of scotch, laughing loudly at his own joke, a group of business acquaintances hanging on his every word. Eleanor was gliding through the room, a gracious hostess in a far too expensive dress. Their faces tightened when they saw us, a flicker of panic in Eleanor's eyes, a flash of pure rage in Richard's. They thought we had come to surrender, to beg for a truce before the holiday. They were wrong. After allowing the guests to settle, I cleared my throat, tapping a glass with a spoon. A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to me. David stood slightly behind me, a silent, solid wall of support. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice calm and clear, projecting through the sudden silence. "Thank you all for coming. David and I won't be staying long, but there is a small matter of business I feel compelled to address." I saw Richard take a half step forward, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. Eleanor's smile was a brittle, painted-on thing. "Many of you know Richard Prescott as a savvy financial consultant," I continued, my gaze sweeping across the faces of his clients and friends. "A man you trust with your businesses and your finances. I'm here tonight to talk about trust. And about a debt." I let the word hang in the air. 6 years ago, before David and I were married, Richard and Eleanor came to me in a panic. Their business was failing. They were about to lose this very house. Gasps rippled through the room. I had their complete attention. They asked me for $75,000. It was my inheritance from my grandmother. I gave it to them, on the promise that they would repay me within a year. That was 2,190 days ago. I have not seen a single cent. "This is outrageous," Richard boomed, finding his voice. "She's lying. This is a private family matter." "Is it a private matter, Richard?" I asked, pulling a small stack of papers from my clutch. "Is creative accounting a private matter? Because I have here records, kept meticulously by a concerned family member, detailing years of you writing off personal expenses as business costs, lavish vacations to Europe, country club memberships, even Eleanor's designer clothes, all filed as business development. Things that your clients, the hardworking people in this room, paid you to advise them against." I handed a copy of the summary to Mr. Henderson, who happened to be standing nearby, drawn by the commotion. He scanned the first page, his face growing grim. I handed another copy to a woman who owned a local chain of boutiques, another of Richard's clients. The reaction was a wave of quiet, horrified murmurs. The faces that had been turned to Richard with admiration were now looking at him with dawning comprehension and disgust. His clients, his friends, were seeing the real man behind the facade. they were seeing a fraud. Eleanor rushed forward, her face a mess of tears and fury. "How could you do this to us? In our own home, on Christmas Eve. You are a monster." "No, Eleanor," I said, my voice devoid of heat. "I am a reflection. I am simply showing everyone the truth you've tried so hard to hide. You built a life on lies, propped up by my money and David's loyalty. The foundation was rotten, and tonight, it finally collapsed. You are not the victims here. You are the architects of your own ruin." Richard stood frozen, his face ashen. The Scotch glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. No one moved to help him. His power, his influence, had evaporated in the space of 5 minutes. He was no longer Richard Prescott, the successful consultant. He was just a man who stole from a young woman who had tried to help him, a common thief exposed in front of his entire world. The party was over. The aftermath was a quiet montage of our new life. The first scene is 2 months later. David and I are in a new apartment downtown, one with a view of the city skyline instead of manicured lawns. We're painting a wall a bright, optimistic yellow, laughing as a smear of paint ends up on his nose. The oppressive weight of his parents is gone, and in its place, our relationship is lighter, stronger. We are a team. The second scene is 6 months after the party. I'm having lunch with Sarah. She tells me her father, emboldened by my actions, finally stood up to Richard and has started his own, honest accounting firm. She tells me the Prescotts had to sell the house. They moved to a small rented condo in a different state. No one from their old life speaks to them anymore. We raise our glasses of iced tea in a silent toast. The third scene is a year later. I am opening my own consulting business, built on a foundation of integrity. My first client is the woman with the boutique chain, the one I handed the papers to at the party. She trusted me because I had dared to speak the truth. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, a letter arrives. It's postmarked from Florida. The return address is just Prescott. I recognize Eleanor's looping, dramatic handwriting. It's a thick envelope, likely filled with pages of blame, self-pity, and attempts at emotional manipulation. I look at it for a long moment, feeling nothing but a distant clinical pity. I don't open it. I walk to the kitchen and drop the letter, unopened, into the trash can. I then place the lid firmly back on top. The final lesson wasn't about revenge. It was about the reclamation of my own dignity. For years, I allowed others to define my worth, to chip away at my sense of self in the name of keeping the peace. But peace at the cost of your soul is not peace. It is a prison. Fighting back wasn't about destroying them. It was about rebuilding myself. It was about declaring that my kindness is not a weakness, my ambition is not a flaw, and my voice will not be silenced. Never let anyone, no matter who they are, make you feel small enough to accept their injustice. Your story is yours to write, and you alone hold the pen. So, take it and write a damn good one.